Hello and welcome to another History of the Remnant Church. Last time we had a very interesting one looking at the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, but we went a little further than that. We looked at the history of France and how impactful that event was for in the negative for the history of France. We see one of the connections that we made with that was the connection between France and England. There are many things that happened in France and England where you see a very similar situation take place, and you see France make the Catholic decision. They make the wrong decision. And in England, you see many times as well, so there's also failures there too, but you see many times you see them make the Protestant decision. You see them make the right decision. You can see the history of these two nations in very different ways. Unfortunately, even some of their bad decisions, but the people there continue to bring that message forward. And so what today we want to do is we want to take a look at, kind of similarly, as we looked at the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre and effects on France, we're going to take a look at the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre's effect on the nation of England and what that domino effect really was from there on out. So before we begin, let's have a word of prayer. Father in heaven, we are studying the history of Protestantism today. We are studying the history of good versus evil, the great controversy between Christ and Satan and his kingdom versus God's kingdom. Yeah. So Lord, help us as we study to see things clearly, to see the decisions, the mistakes that nations and people have made in the past, to not make those same mistakes today. Yes. To be aware and not fooled by the trickeries of Rome and their assumptions of peace that they offer. This is never the case. Rome has not changed. So help us to be vigilant about that today. Lord, help us as we study the history of England in a nutshell, from the happenings of the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre to the founding of this nation, the United States of America. And it's in Jesus' precious name we pray.
Amen.
So, to begin our discussion, I want to read two quotes. One's from Encyclopedia Britannica, and another is from Wikipedia. Both are on this man's name that you mentioned last time, Francis Walsingham. Mm-hmm. So Francis Walsingham, he was a Protestant. He actually was a Protestant that served even under Catholic monarchs as well, Mary, for instance, and he was always a very powerful voice for the Protestants. So even when we're in Elizabethan England, for instance, Queen Elizabeth did not like the Puritans or the separatists, what they called them. He was many times the voice of reason and granting toleration to those groups. Like the Puritans. Mm-hmm. And so he's also considered to be the founder of really clandestine spycraft, which is how he uncovered so many plots. See, the Jesuits, as they took their aims on people in France, we see them assassinating kings. They tried the same thing in England, but they failed because of this man, Francis Walsingham. Mm-hmm. So I'll read the first one and then I'll jump right into the next one. Sir Francis Walsingham, he was born in 1532 in Kent, England. He died in 1590 in London. He was an English statesman and a diplomat who was the principal secretary to Queen Elizabeth and became legendary for creating highly effective intelligence network. He successfully thwarted England's foreign enemies, which were Jesuits, by the way. History of Protestantism points that out very clearly. Mm-hmm. And the exposed domestic plotters who sought to unseat Elizabeth and return a Roman Catholic monarch to the throne. anticipated methods that would become routine only centuries later in the world's intelligence services. Walsingham employed double agents, covert propaganda and disinformation, code breaking, and agent provocateurs to advance English interests. His efforts culminated in the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, due to her involvement. Now, it doesn't say this, but I'm saying it, due to her involvement in one of the assassination attempts against Elizabeth, which he uncovered that she actually was having direct communication with someone who was involved in the assassination, and so she was actually part of the plot, which led to her death. And actually, it was such an amazing and important moment because she was a royal. And in this moment, we saw that even royals could not be above the law. And so the foundation of the law of the land as being something that is sovereign over all the people, including the monarchs, including royalty, individuals like Mary, Queen of Scots, this was one of those things that was helping to cement that idea in the minds of the people at that time. The Wikipedia article says he was a committed Protestant. During the reign of Catholic Queen Mary I of England, he joined other expatriates in exile in Switzerland and northern Italy until Mary's death and the accession of her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth. Walsingham rose from relative obscurity to become one of the small coterie who directed the Elizabethan state. Overseeing foreign, domestic, and religious policy, he served as an English ambassador to France in the early 1570s and he witnessed the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre. As principal secretary, he supported exploration, colonization, and development of the Navy and the plantation of Ireland. He worked to bring Scotland and England together. His foreign policy demonstrated a new understanding of the role of England as a maritime Protestant power with intercontinental trading ties. He oversaw operations that penetrated Spanish military preparation, gathered intelligence from across Europe, disrupted a range of plots against Elizabeth, and secured the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. You know, some of the things that he had stopped or was directly involved with were the Rodolphi, who was a Catholic international banker plot from 1571, where Mary was Queen of Scots was to be wedded to the Duke of Norfolk, and then they were to overthrow the Queen. There was another one, the Throckmorton plot, which directly involved Jesuits they all involved Jesuits, but this one in a much more open way. In 1583, there was a plan to overthrow Elizabeth and install Mary in her place. And then the most famous one, which would be the Babington plot.
Kody, if I can insert one thing right here.
Yeah.
And that is every single thing that you're discussing as far as the history of England. If it had not gone that way, you and I would be speaking in Spanish.
Yeah.
With ourselves today. In fact, we wouldn't even be here having this discussion if the events and the personages that you're describing did not fulfill their God-ordained duties. We wouldn't be here. We'd be speaking a foreign language, and the history of America would be completely different than what it's been.
Yeah.
So every single one of those things directly has a part in us being liberty-loving, civil and religious liberty people.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, huge.
And the most famous one that he thwarted was the Babington plot. This one was the one where he actually found coded letters between Anthony Babington and Mary, Queen of Scots, which outlined the assassination plan and ended up with the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots. Now, this individual, Francis Walsingham, is comparable in many ways, and probably in many ways superior in certain areas, to Francis Gaspard de Coligny. They both had this high-ranking statesman who was very pro-Protestant. You know, when Elizabeth didn't like the separatists, as I had mentioned earlier, herself, She wasn't always a good queen. We view her as a good queen in the same way we view King James as a good king, but they weren't really good. It was because they had really great people around them that helped them to form policy. And this individual in particular was one of those individuals. So whereas they killed their Gaspard de Coligny in France, Walsingham was spared. And whereas they committed assassination against royals, kings, and queens, and things like that, those things were thwarted and stopped because of Walsingham in England. So you kind of see the two nations having similar things happen to them, similar events, and you see it going in the Protestant direction, or in a more outward way, making a positive Protestant decision in England versus in France, what we've seen. And we see that go down to, as we mentioned before when we talked about France, this led to eventually the French Revolution and really the destruction of all Christianity in France and the destruction of the very heart and soul of the French people. Versus in England, we see maritime expansion, we see industrial explosion, we see all these blessings that take place because of their Protestant foundation.
Mm-hmm. You know, Kody, the one ill that I think we can say of Queen Elizabeth and King James, which is something they derived from, of course, Elizabeth derived it from her father, Henry VIII. But in that time frame, Kody, in the early, latter part of the 16th century, which was massive in history as it applies to America, these folk, Kody, have lived through 1,000 years of church-state union.
Yeah.
Where the Pope has run the church and the government for over 1,000 years. And so then, you know, when Henry had his squabbles over his marriage to Catherine and his desire to annul it, Kody, of course, Henry VIII's idea was, well, if the Pope can run the church and be the figurehead and run the nation, well, I can do the same thing. And so he sought to implement a state church, which then Queen Elizabeth picks up and James picks
Yes.
up. And that's where you had the development of the separatists, eventually the Puritans, people who said, no, we want to get back to the church of the Bible. We don't want a church with a pope and a state with a king. We don't want that. So you can see the evolution, but that would be the great negative in all of those people's realms as they sought to break free from papal domination. But of course, Kody, again, I think we've got to be gentle with these people who were coming out of papal darkness.
Absolutely, and that's why Walsingham is so important, because he has a foresight to this stuff where, you know, even Elizabeth, which, you know, for all her faults, she was overall net positive for the country, for sure.
Absolutely.
But she had some issues with the state church ideas, and you see this man, Francis Walsingham, constantly going to bat for the separatists and Puritans, saying, you know, they need to be, you know, advocating for the right for them to worship God according to the dictates of their conscience, which is really where this stuff is starting to come from. This is the core principle that Walsingham was trying to give to Elizabeth and other people when he served on the court. And this is the understanding that the Puritans had as well. And this is what eventually leads them to the New World, is this one core principle. And it's interesting the ebb and flow of how it goes, but yeah, it's that principle that's at the heart and soul of this all.
Absolutely. You know, Walsingham, Kody, I've read documents that Walsingham was actually in Paris when St. Bartholomew's occurred.
Yes.
He was an English representative, ambassador, if you will, to France. He saw what happened when Rome and the Jesuits gained control of a government. He saw it right there in Paris. He saw the slaughter that took place. And Kody, you're either going to go one way or another when you see something so drastic as that. You're either going to say, well, that's what I want to be like. I want to be a dragon that's just going to go and annihilate people. Or you're going to take the other extreme and you're going to say, I'm going to do everything I can to protect the religious freedom of all people within my jurisdiction. And of course, Walsingham took that path.
And undoubtedly, there was people that probably thought he was taking things too far. But because he witnessed the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, he knew his enemy. And one thing that he never did was underestimate his enemy. So that's why he was always at the head of all these things. And obviously, for all the man's strengths and everything else, it was God who was guiding him.
Absolutely.
Because it was God who was showing him how to figure out all these things, these secret ways that they were communicating, and then on the other side of it, implement new ways, double agents and things like that, to be able to gather intel of what the Jesuits were trying to do. And by the way, that idea that the Jesuits were involved in all of the assassination attempts against Elizabeth, that's not like a conspiracy. That is a well-known fact of history that has probably been lost to a certain extent today. But I have a quote here from History of Protestantism. It's chapter 16. You know what chapter 16 is called? Excommunication of Elizabeth and the plots of the Jesuits. So she gets excommunicated, and then of course there are very fanatical Jesuits and Catholics that are joining forces to assassinate him over and over and over again. Walsingham stops these assassinations. But it states this: at length Campion addressed a letter to the Privy Council boldly avowing his enterprise, which was to revive England in the faith that was first planted and must be restored. Of course, he's talking about the Catholic one. Mm-hmm. And boasting that the Jesuits of all countries were leagued together for this object and would never desist from the persecution of it or prosecution of it so long as there remained one man to hang in Tyburn. So this was a well-known fact. And even as we're going to be looking at in a little bit with King James, the gunpowder plot, it was also known in history as the Jesuit treason. They're synonymous. The Jesuit treason is the gunpowder plot. The gunpowder plot is the Jesuit treason. That's how it's remembered. So it's not a guesstimate. It's not a conspiracy. It's not we've dug this up and found and connected this dot and that. It's a well-known fact of history that the Jesuits were involved in assassinations against kings and queens.
Absolutely.
And we saw it happen in France.
Sure. Well, Kody, the book by Shepherd, J.E.C. Shepherd, it's called The Babington Plot. Shepherd he documents the fact that it was a Jesuit conspiracy. It was a Jesuit plot over and over and over again to get rid of Queen Elizabeth.
Yeah.
And that went on, Kody. We're looking at throughout the 1570s into the 1580s. I think the Babington plot was in 1586, 1587, if I'm not mistaken.
1586.
Okay. Well then, Kody, because all of those plots by the Jesuits to kill this Protestant queen who refused to allow them to rule her kingdom of England, they sent in the Spanish Armada.
That's right.
They sent in the Spanish Armada in 1588.
That's right.
So you have, and who doesn't know, if we've read anything in English history, about how Philip II, the son of Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, at the Diet of Worms, it was his son, Philip II of Spain, that had the Armada built. The Pope at that time, Pope Sixtus, said, "Look, I'll give the Spanish £1,000,000 of whatever." I think it was called a scudi at that time. Kody, you have the papacy, you have the Jesuits, you have Spain. a Catholic-dominated country, they're going to do whatever it takes to destroy the Protestant queen. Again, not the perfect Protestant queen, but the Protestant queen nevertheless.
Absolutely.
And again, yeah, like you're saying, Kody, this isn't something we're fishing up and
Right.
saying, oh, well, we think this happened, so we're going to let you have it. No, these are well-known, documented historical facts.
Absolutely. And even the Spanish Armada, since you brought it up, the Spanish Armada hit a bunch of massive storms, and whole swaths of the Armada were just completely destroyed by storms before they were able to reach England. So you see God stepping in on England's behalf. And then, of course, we mentioned last time about the large ships of the Spanish Armada and how much they put into those great man-o'-wars and things that they had. And the problem was that they fought in the English Channel, and the English Channel was very narrow, and Sir Francis Drake was able to maneuver his schooner ships much faster. So they were smaller, less firepower, but they were able to, basically they were more agile, and they were able to defeat the Spanish Armada. And it's from that point forward, or shortly thereafter, as the Spanish Armada tries several times to do this over the course of a few years, you see England rise as the maritime power in the world, whereas before that it was Spain, it was France, it was these other groups. But England is the one that ends up being what we remember today. Even today, we still remember her as the mistress of the seas. She owns the seas, and that's because of the complete collapse of Catholicism versus Protestantism, and how God protected England at the time of the Spanish Armada. That's where it all comes from.
Again, Kody, I go back.
Traces back to St. Bartholomew's again. So it's very interesting.
Absolutely. And in any case, Kody, if the Armada had won, I'd be saying, ¿Cómo estás? I'd be saying, Feliz Sábado. We would not be a Protestant country today.
Yeah.
All of these events, because the history of England is intertwined and interwoven into American history completely. And so any of those events that you've described, if any of those assassination plots had been successful, if the Armada had been successful, England could have easily become Spanish, and America would have become Spanish, with a government of tyranny and despotism.
Right.
So we can see how God had his hand over England, and ultimately then had his hand over the United States of America.
Absolutely. So after Mary, we have King James enters into the scene of history.
After Elizabeth,
What did I say?
you said Mary, but that's okay. So I thought you were
After
talking about
Elizabeth.
Mary, Queen of Scots.
No.
When did she die, actually? Mary, Queen of Scots. It was 1580.
It might have been, I believe it was 87 by the time
Pretty sure, yeah.
everything was done.
Okay.
And yeah, I believe by the time the trial and everything was done, and the execution, the sentence, the date, and all that, it was the next year.
Okay.
But she was indicted at that time. And she actually tried to escape, too. So she was obviously guilty. But
So we come down, the Armada's 1588, Mary died, Mary Queen of Scots 1587. These repeated plots on Elizabeth's life culminates in the Armada 1588. Elizabeth then lives another 15 years, and then you got King James.
King James, who is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, right? And the rightful heir to the Scottish portion of the kingdom, because Mary dies without an heir, or I'm sorry, I keep calling her Mary. Elizabeth dies without an heir.
Right.
King James takes over. And King James is again, overall, we would say a net positive for England. Obviously, he has the King James Bible, which he commissioned to be made. This Bible is still the best Bible that's ever been created. The updated 1700s version is the one that we still use today. The 1611's got the Apocrypha and stuff like that in it, and it's in the Old English. It's a little bit harder to understand. But the 1700s updated English version, that's still the best Bible that we have, the most accurate Bible that we have. So great things there, but also, like Elizabeth, but maybe a little bit worse than Elizabeth, he was Catholic. And he also, when he was bringing the churches together with the Puritans, and he was hearing the Puritan side, and he was bringing the whole commission together for the Bible, he was doing it for ecumenical purposes. He was doing it so that he would have peace in his own land. So he was doing it for political gain, really. Mm-hmm. And he also believed in the divine right of kings. So he believed that God had appointed him to be king, and that nobody could go against anything that he had said, because if they did, they were really opposing God and not him, no matter what he did. And he was a persecutor. He was a persecutor of the separatists, whereas Elizabeth many times wanted to, and I think in some cases she did sometimes, but Walsingham kind of stood as a barrier. Walsingham is now gone. He's out of the picture.
1590.
Right. And so you have King James, and he starts persecuting the separatists or the Puritans, because he wants them to go to church on the day of worship. So in a way, it's like a Sunday law, pretty much. Mm-hmm. And he wants them to be part of the churches. He disapproves gatherings outside of church for religious purposes. And those who are Puritans and separatists, he invokes heavy taxes and fines upon them when they're caught doing their basic right to liberty of conscience. When they're caught doing that, he fines them, he confiscates their property in some cases. So these Puritans end up fleeing the scene. But
let's take a step back.
I was going to go backwards for a second.
Okay, go ahead.
Before that happens, there's a major event that takes place where King James is almost killed and assassinated himself. And that's called the Gunpowder Plot of 1605. And this is such an important piece of history for England today, even today. They have this poem that they read off. Remember the 5th of November, the gunpowder treason and plot. And one of the versions actually states, it's an old version. I've been at a loss to find a copy somewhere, but I know that it's called the Jesuit treason as well. But one of the things that it would usually say is, let me tell you a reason why gunpowder treason ought never to be forgot. But there's another version that says, let me tell you a reason why Jesuit treason ought never to be forgot. So what was the gunpowder plot? Well, I have a quote here.
Guy Fawkes.
Guy Fawkes, yep. And they call it Guy Fawkes Day to this day. Mm-hmm. The gunpowder plot of 1605 in earlier centuries, often called the gunpowder treason plot or the Jesuit treason. That's Wikipedia, of all people. Mm-hmm. I like to use Wikipedia because in many cases you're hearing what even is most widely accepted by the world. So if this is what the world is agreeing, what it's called, that's a for sure what it was called. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It was an unsuccessful attempted regicide against King James VI of Scotland and the First of England by a group of English Catholics led by Robert Catesby. Guy Fawkes is also involved. The plan was to blow up the House of Lords during the state opening of Parliament on Tuesday, the 5th of November, 1605.
Kody, help me with something. We've mentioned about King James, his persecution of the separatists, ultimately the Puritans, his belief in the divine right of kings. He's a Roman Catholic. Why would the Roman Catholics and the Jesuits, during King James's kingdom, he's 2 years into office, why did the Babington plot occur? Because all that we've said about King James thus far, you look at it and you say, well, he played right into Rome's hands. He persecuted those who wanted to follow the Bible. He believed that he had absolute authority over his kingdom. So what was it that led the Jesuits to push people like Gatsby, like Guy Fawkes, and others? Why the Babington Plot? Not the Babington Plot, but the Gunpowder Plot.
Yeah.
Why?
Well, the reason why is the same reason as Elizabeth, ironically, is that he still allowed the Anglican Church to be the premier church in England and not the Roman Catholic Church. And he was not pushing Roman Catholicism and installing himself as a Roman Catholic king and enforcing Roman Catholicism in his lands, which is what the Jesuits wanted. So what they wanted to do was they simply wanted to reinstall an obedient Roman Catholic monarch who would drive out the Protestants in the same way that they did in France and wipe them out, kill them, or drive them away, whatever was the case. And King James was not willing to do that. He was not willing to do that. And because of that great quality about the man, they saw him as an obstacle that they had to destroy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, how much influence, Kody, can we expect there to have been in England in 1603 when Elizabeth dies? How much influence did Protestantism still bear in England after Queen Elizabeth died? How much would you say?
Oh, it was very strong. It was very strong. And in fact, it had only gotten stronger during the years of the Elizabethan reign, because you had, Francis Bacon and the scientific method that was introduced. You had Shakespeare during that time. Mm-hmm. You had the rise of the maritime power of England and the exploration that was going on, and Francis Drake, who was a pirate at certain points, a pirate, right, where he would destroy Spanish and French ships. One of the places he actually attacked was here in Florida, called the St. Petersburg. He actually won. He actually attacked that city with his ships and took over the city for a time. And so Protestantism is very powerful in England at this time. And also, I think one of the things that is very important to mention here is that, and I can't remember the individual's name, forgive me, maybe you might remember, but the education that King James received as a child was from an ardent Protestant. And he learned about the Bible and how to read the Bible. He was so well versed in the Bible that even he thought that the bishop's Bible was garbage, which was the main Anglican Bible at the time. And he knew that there was things that needed to be changed, and they needed an updated, cohesive Bible that was actually accurate. And he even mentioned certain things. He had quoted passages to some of the Anglican ministers where he was showing them, like, this is a dumb verse. It doesn't mean that. So I have no doubts that Protestant professor that he had growing up, his private tutor really, had a tremendous impact on his respect for Protestantism to exist. So the Jesuits had to kill him. That's their only, they couldn't change him, so they had to kill him.
So, and the Gunpowder Plot, in actuality, the gunpowder and where Fawkes was actually found, it wasn't just about King James. He was the main person, but this was about the entire British Parliament.
Right, who were Protestants mainly.
Who were Protestants.
That's a good point to bring up too.
And so with the Gunpowder Plot and I don't remember if it was 36 barrels of gunpowder that were ultimately found with Guy Fawkes underneath the British Parliament, this was about annihilating the entire British government in one swoop.
Right. Absolutely.
With again, I mean, you look at it, Kody, and yes, the Armada, England wins. All the Jesuit plots to kill Queen Elizabeth, they fail. But we're still in the throes. 1603, the settlers didn't come, the Puritans didn't come to Massachusetts Bay till 17 years later. So we're still in the throes where if the Jesuits were to win any of these battles, America's history would be totally different. So we can still see the hand of God that protected England, protected the British Parliament, paved the way for the rise of America. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's good that you mentioned that with the product, the fact that the target really wasn't just James. It was all the Protestant leadership in the country. So the plot is actually uncovered through a quirk of fate because of a Catholic and dues given to this Catholic for putting his country and his king over this evil plot from Roman Catholic sources. There was a Catholic, Lord Monteagle, who received a letter, an anonymous letter, warning him to not be in Parliament on the opening day, November 5th, 1605. So he shows this letter to the leadership. King James reads it himself even, like maybe 2 days prior. And they start searching, and he picks up on one of the words, King James himself. And I have no doubts that was God that was helping him. The way the anonymous person wrote the letter, they said, be prepared, something might blow or something. So he immediately thought gunpowder is involved. So they're looking around for gunpowder. They go down into the cellars the day before November 5th, and they find Guy Fawkes, the assassin Guy Fawkes, down there, right there next to all the barrels that are directly under the House of Lords. And he's arrested at that time. Literally, King James and those groups of people saved by the skin of their teeth. Mm-hmm. Due to a Catholic who was willing to put his country before an evil pope. So,
it's fascinating, Kody. When you said that they got an anonymous letter telling King James or some politician.
Yeah, Lord Monteagle.
Okay, do not go into that building on such and such a day, which immediately carries an ominous sign. And I look at that, Kody, and I think it made me push ahead to 1995 at Oklahoma City. That when the Murrah building was bombed on April 19, 1995, the ATF that had offices in the Murrah building, none of them reported for work that day. None of them were hurt. None of them were there in the Murrah building when it was blown up.
Wow.
The more things change, the more things remain the same.
Absolutely. And does a leopard change their spots? So where is this stuff coming from? If it was the Jesuits in Elizabethan era, if it's the Jesuits in the King James era, what is the terroristic acts today? Who's ultimately responsible for 9/11? Who's ultimately responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing? For a lot of these terrorist attacks that have taken place in Europe for the last 20 years? Who's ultimately responsible? It's the same groups.
Same groups.
Same groups doing the same things.
Same groups.
During the trial, actually, Sir Edward Coke stated, "I never knew a treason without a Romish priest, but in this there are very many Jesuits who are known to have dealt and passed through the whole action."
They were behind the whole plot, Kody.
Absolutely.
To annihilate a nation in one blow. Annihilate a nation. What's another example in history where there was an attempt in one blow to wipe out a kingdom, to wipe it out with its thought leaders, to wipe them out so that Rome could step in? America? Civil War? Of course, that was a bloody battle over, but, well, okay, there you go. Lincoln. The night Lincoln was killed, there was a Jesuit plot to kill Lincoln, Vice President Johnson, head of the military, Ulysses S. Grant, and Secretary of State, William Seward. If all of those leaders, they were the main focal point of the American government. Right after the Civil War, President, Vice President, head of the military, Secretary of State, wipe them out in one night. What was the point? It would be to abolish and destroy the leadership so that Rome could still gain the victory that they had lost during the Civil War.
Absolutely.
So it's one night, annihilate all the opposition so we can still take it. And that's what the gunpowder plot was. That's what happened when Lincoln was killed. Same idea, Kody, with the same purpose involved.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great example. Great example.
Wow.
So it fails. Guy Fawkes is arrested. The Jesuits, the other members, Robert Catesby and the other Jesuits and Catholics who are involved, are eventually found and arrested, and they're all tried and sentenced.
One of the Jesuit priests, his name was Father Garnet.
Yeah. Yes.
Do we see parallels, Kody? Guy Fawkes was a nobody, really.
Yeah.
You know, probably he wasn't, what would we say? He wasn't in the intellectual elite. He was, probably just made an honest living day by day. But he was the patsy. He was the one who would take the blame for the event if caught. But the footprints behind Guy Fawkes, it was the Jesuit priests of Rome that nerved him, and Gatsby and these other commoners, if you will, to carry out this dastardly plot. But again, it was the hierarchy of Rome that pushed the entire agenda. And again, we see that reoccurring time and time and time again. You go to Dallas, Texas, 1963. Oswald becomes the patsy. Oswald becomes the trigger man who they're going to pin the murder on of JFK. But Kody, there were so many elements behind, and they walked free, scot-free. So, but Rome has done that for centuries.
Right.
Where they will pick out a patsy to do the dirty work, to suffer the punishment, and they'll continue to go free.
Absolutely. And like with Oswald, he was killed before his trial.
Right.
By a mafia member by the name of, I believe it was Jack Ruby.
Yeah.
I believe it was Jack Ruby. Ruby for sure.
Yeah, Jack Ruby.
Okay, he kills him right before he can do it, before he could really say anything. If he had some truth to tell on the matter, he's killed before he can even say anything. So, yeah, that's what Rome does. That's absolutely what Rome does. And you want to know something real sick about all of this? The way Rome has changed Guy Fawkes to this day. They used to burn the Pope in effigy every year. Right. Now they just burn whatever they feel like in effigy. Some places they burn Trump in effigy. They just burned something that they don't like. I believe sometimes the Pope is still burned in effigy with certain groups, but it's more of a rare thing than a common occurrence as it was in the past. But what's so sad now is today there's something called the Guy Fawkes mask. And you can purchase a Guy Fawkes mask. And the Guy Fawkes mask is representative of somebody who is against the global elite. So actually, this mask, you and I even would agree with much of what this mask represents as far as being against the global elite, being against their agenda to take over the world, to subjugate the people, and to make them basically nothing more than well-fed slaves.
Wow.
And there's a movie about it called V for Vendetta, where he wears the Guy Fawkes mask because Guy Fawkes represents somebody who stands up against evil, tyrannical governments, right? But that is a total inversion of who Guy Fawkes really was. Guy Fawkes is the tyrant. Guy Fawkes is the one who's in league with Rome to overthrow a good government so that a tyrannical government can take place. And that whole idea has been totally flipped on its head today, where you even see people sometimes at protests where they'll wear the Guy Fawkes mask. And what they're saying when they wear it is that I am against your agenda. I am against the globalist agenda. I am against the Great Reset. I am against the World Economic Forum. I am against, the poisoning of our food, the poisoning of our education, many things that we could agree with. And it's sick and twisted the way that whole symbol has been changed to this day. It's looked at as a good thing. And Guy Fawkes, for people who don't know the history, they probably think of him as some kind of hero now.
Absolutely.
And that's what Rome does.
Absolutely.
She inverts the truth.
Absolutely.
So King James, you good there?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll leave you here, and then we're going to get into what happens with the separatist Puritans, because King James begins to persecute the separatists or the Puritans, and from there they feel like they can no longer coexist in the current state of England. So they end up fleeing, and then from there they end up in the New World. So that's what we're gonna look at, and we're gonna look at the principles that they took with them along that journey. So if you would you close us out in prayer?
Yes, sir. Dear Father in heaven, what Kody and I have looked at today has a direct bearing on what we do today. We're thankful that you preserved England from tyranny and despotism from Rome. We're thankful that you protected Elizabeth, that you protected King James and the Parliament. We're thankful that all of these things directly play for how you have used America in world history, and how you were able to use this nation as the cradle for your final messages to this planet, which directly affects us. We thank you for your love. We thank you for protecting your truth. We just pray that you'd light a fire in our hearts to continue to go forward, to share your truths with a lost and dying world. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.